Ever catch yourself putting on a work face?
Mm.
And I don't just mean like hiding you're tired, but like a whole part of who you are.
Yeah.
Today's Deep Dive goes deep, folks. We're talking ADHD masking, especially for women in the workplace.
Right.
And trust me, the insights are eye-opening, even if you don't have ADHD.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It goes way beyond just individuals trying to cope. Like, there's this whole systemic layer to it.
Right.
How workplaces themselves might unintentionally make things tougher.
Okay, so let's dive into it.
Yeah.
We're centering today's deep dive around an article called Understanding ADHD Masking, Challenges Faced by Neurodivergent Women in the Workplace. And like right off the bat, they hit us with how masking can be this heavy burden.
Yeah, they use this phrase, masking being this constant question of, what would a normal person do? Which is so relatable. It's more than just trying to focus, It's forcing a smile when you're zoned out, overworking to compensate.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a whole second job no one else sees.
A second job no one sees. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
And this constant pressure to conform, to appear normal, doesn't that just scream burnout?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Imagine that energy drain of constantly monitoring yourself.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, and over time it can really chip away at your self-esteem too.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't been diagnosed with ADHD yet, they might internalize those struggles,
Right.
thinking something's inherently wrong with them instead of recognizing how their brain works differently.
Which brings us to another big point from the article, the gender gap in diagnosis.
Yeah.
Get this. According to the CDC, boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD as children.
Wow.
That's huge.
That is huge, and it really highlights the disparities in how we identify and understand ADHD. It's not necessarily that it's more common in boys, but that our traditional understanding of ADHD has often been through a more masculine lens.
So then many women end up being diagnosed much later in life.
Right.
Sometimes not until their 30s, 40s, even 50s.
Yeah.
That's after years of potentially dealing with misdiagnoses like anxiety or depression.
Exactly, and think about the implications for masking. If you've spent decades internalizing those struggles, believing it's just a personal failing,
Right.
by the time you're diagnosed, that masking has become almost second nature. It reinforces this idea that who you are naturally isn't workplace appropriate.
It makes you wonder how many are out there silently struggling because they've become so good at hiding it.
Right, exactly.
The article touches on this interesting statistic about women in leadership positions.
Mhm.
We hear all about women breaking glass ceilings, becoming CEOs.
Yeah.
And while they now hold more Fortune 500 CEO positions, it's still barely over 10%.
Wow.
The progress is there, but it's slow.
Yeah, and that statistic speaks to the larger context. Even without ADHD, women in the workplace face, deeply ingrained biases.
Right.
Now layer on the challenges of neurodiversity, and it's a whole other level of complexity to navigate.
It's like you're constantly battling these expectations on top of just trying to get your work done.
Exactly, yeah, and that's where this double bind comes in that the article talks about, traditional feminine traits, whatever those even are,
Right.
aren't always seen as leadership material. But if a woman tries to break out of that mold, she risks being labeled as aggressive,
Right.
difficult,
Right.
all these sorts of things. It's a lose-lose situation.
It's so disheartening. And then the article goes on to highlight expectation bias, how it plays out in the workplace.
Right.
Like women being assigned tasks based on stereotypes.
Yeah.
Like note-taking or event planning instead of their actual skills.
Right.
Which on the surface might seem harmless enough.
Sure, yeah.
But it's really not.
But they reinforce this limited view of their capabilities and their potential, right?
Totally.
Like someone with a knack for strategic thinking and problem solving might get stuck, organizing lunches simply because it fits the stereotype.
Right.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because with ADHD, things like organization, planning, multitasking, those are often areas of struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you're constantly being evaluated on those things in a very traditional work environment.
It's setting them up for failure.
Yeah, in a way, yes. And that's why the article really emphasizes it's not just about individuals masking or trying harder.
Right.
Like the system itself needs to change,
Right. Yeah.
It's about recognizing that different brains work differently and that those differences can be incredible strengths if we let them flourish.
Totally. So how do we even begin to change things? The article talks about unmasking.
Right.
Which sounds great in theory. Like,
Yeah.
be your authentic self, bring your whole self to work.
Right.
But
Right.
they caution that in a system that's still grappling with all these biases,
Yeah,
it can really backfire.
absolutely.
And this is where it gets really, really tricky.
Right.
Because it's not about, staying silent and being miserable in your job, but how do you advocate for yourself without risking your career,
Right.
especially if you're just starting out?
Exactly. And the article suggests starting by focusing on your needs, not necessarily your diagnosis.
Okay.
Like needing fewer back-to-back meetings for better focus, that's a reasonable request
Right.
that benefits everyone, not just someone with ADHD, right?
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good first step, focusing on the needs, not the label. But what about these companies that are claiming to be neurodiversity friendly?
Oh,
There's been
yeah.
a lot of talk about that lately.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it's genuine? And how can someone tell if a company's truly walking the walk?
That's a great question. It's fantastic that there's growing awareness about neurodiversity.
Right.
But as with many well-intentioned concepts, it's essential to look beyond the buzzwords.
Okay.
Like true neurodiversity goes beyond simply hiring people with different thinking styles, right? It's about fostering a culture where those differences are genuinely valued, accommodated, and celebrated.
So how can someone tell if a company is genuinely invested in creating that inclusive environment? What are some signs to look for?
Well, I think there are a few things you can look at.
Okay.
Do they have dedicated employee resource groups for neurodivergent employees,
Okay.
offering a space for support and advocacy?
Right.
Do they offer flexible work arrangements?
Okay.
Recognizing that different brains thrive in different environments.
Yep.
Maybe most importantly, do their managers receive training on managing neurodiversity?
Well, that's a great point.
Right, equipping them with the skills and understanding to support their team members effectively. These are just a few questions to ask.
Yeah, those are really great points. It's one thing to publicly declare you're inclusive.
Right.
But it's another thing entirely to actually do the work to create that environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it goes beyond just checking boxes.
Right.
It's about fostering this culture of empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
And genuine respect for the different ways that people's brains work,
It's almost like companies need to unmask too, right?
Yeah.
Be open about where they are in the process of becoming truly inclusive
Yeah.
rather than trying to project this image of perfection.
Exactly. Because I think the ultimate role, and the article touches upon this, is to cultivate an environment where people can be both mask-free and thriving.
Yes.
Right. Not just surviving, but truly showing up as their authentic selves, contributing their unique talents, and being valued for it.
That's a powerful image. It makes you wonder how different things could be if we were all just a little more understanding, a little more accommodating of just the beautiful diversity of human experience.
Absolutely, yeah. We often talk about the power of diversity, and that includes neurodiversity, right? Embracing different perspectives, different approaches, different ways of thinking. That's how innovation happens, how we grow as individuals, as teams, as a society.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive here.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways that our listeners can carry with them, not just in terms of understanding ADHD masking, but also in terms of creating more inclusive environments, whether it's in the workplace or just in their personal lives?
Yeah, I think a big takeaway is just awareness.
Okay.
Like recognizing that ADHD masking exists, understanding its impact.
Right.
And then challenging those, those ingrained biases we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Those are crucial first steps.
It's about shifting perspectives, really.
Absolutely.
Seeing those differences, not as deficits, but as strengths.
Yeah.
Like, who are we not hearing from? Whose talents are we missing out on? Because they've just become so good at, blending in.
Right.
Fitting into a system that wasn't really designed with them in mind.
That's such a good point. It's not just about the workplace either. It's all areas of life.
Right.
How can we create spaces in our workplaces, in our families, our communities, where people just, feel safe, safe and supported in showing up authentically?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I love how the article ends on this note of possibility.
Yeah.
Talks about, creating those environments where people can be mask-free and thriving.
Yes.
Not just surviving, but truly, flourishing, contributing their unique gifts, and being celebrated for who they are.
And creating those environments starts with small steps, right?
Right.
It could be educating ourselves about neurodiversity, challenging our own unconscious biases.
Yeah.
Maybe even just asking a colleague, how can I best support you?
Yeah. Those are such good, actionable takeaways. It's a reminder that even small actions can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
And, it's all about creating more inclusive, welcoming spaces for everyone.
Okay.
So, as always, we like to leave our listeners with something to ponder,
Okay.
something to kind of spark further reflection.
I like it.
Thinking about your own workplace or even your personal life, what would it look like to cultivate that mask-free and thriving environment? What's one small step, just one, that you could take to kind of move towards that vision?
Yeah.
It's something to chew on, to sit with, and just see what possibilities emerge.